A rancher lived alone until a beautiful girl hung bleeding from a post. John McAllister lived alone on his ranch, far away from the noise and rush of the nearest town. The land stretched endlessly around him, wide-open plains dotted with green pastures, golden hills, and the occasional cluster of trees. The sky above seemed to go on forever, and in the early morning, when the sun rose slowly, the world felt calm and peaceful. John had lived here for more than 20 years, ever since his parents had passed and left him the property. Over time, he had grown used to the quiet. It was a different kind of life, one that most people would find lonely, but John had learned to find comfort in the solitude. Every day began in the same way. Before sunrise, John would rise from his bed in the small cabin that had been in his family for generations. The cabin was simple, sturdy, and functional. It had a stone fireplace that kept the house warm in winter, wooden floors that creaked slightly when stepped on, and a small kitchen with just enough utensils and tools for cooking. John preferred it this way. There was no need for extra rooms, no need for fancy decorations. The ranch had everything he needed: his animals, his land, and the freedom to live life at his own pace. After a quick breakfast, usually bread toasted over the fire and a cup of strong coffee, John would put on his worn boots and step outside. The morning air was crisp and smelled faintly of grass and soil. The ranch was quiet except for the sounds of nature, the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, the distant calls of birds, and the occasional lowing of cattle. John would spend hours checking fences, feeding the animals, and walking the pasture to make sure everything was in order. His life required hard work, but he didn't mind. There was a satisfaction in doing things with his own hands, in seeing the results of his labor in the healthy cattle grazing on the green fields and the fences standing strong after storms. Evenings were a time for reflection. John would often sit on the porch with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky would turn shades of pink, orange, and purple, and the silence would become almost magical. In moments like these, he felt a connection to the world that was hard to describe. The ranch was his home, but it was also his sanctuary, a place where he could think, remember, and dream. He sometimes thought of the people he had known in town, friends he had lost touch with over the years. But he never felt lonely for long because the land had a way of filling the emptiness with quiet beauty. Despite the peaceful routine, John's life was not without challenges. Winter could be harsh, with snowdrifts high enough to make some areas of the ranch nearly inaccessible. Summer brought heat, and sometimes the cattle would get sick or wander off. But John had learned to handle every situation, often alone, without asking for help. He had become resourceful, patient, and strong, both physically and mentally. These qualities had been necessary not just for the ranch, but for surviving the long stretches of solitude. Over time, John developed small habits that made the ranch feel like a home. He kept a journal in which he wrote about the day's events, the weather, and even small thoughts that crossed his mind. He tended a small garden with vegetables and herbs, which gave him a sense of satisfaction when he harvested something fresh. On Sundays, he would clean the cabin from top to bottom, polishing the wooden floors, dusting the shelves, and arranging the few decorations he had inherited from his parents. It was these small routines that gave his life structure and meaning, and he cherished them deeply. But even in the midst of his contentment, there were times when John wondered what it would be like to have someone else around. Sometimes in the silence of the night, he would imagine having someone to share a meal with, someone to talk to after a long day of work. Yet, these thoughts were fleeting. He had grown used to living alone, and the idea of companionship, while appealing at times, was also unfamiliar. The ranch had always been his world, and he had found comfort in its routines and its solitude. One chilly morning, as John was preparing to check the fences on the far side of the ranch, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. The wind carried a faint, unusual sound that he couldn't immediately identify. He paused, listening carefully. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but there was a hint of movement that didn't belong to the usual sounds of the ranch. Shrugging it off at first, he continued on his path, walking through the grass that brushed against his boots and occasionally stepping over small rocks and fallen branches. The sun was rising slowly, casting long shadows across the fields, and the air smelled of fresh dew. As he approached the edge of the property near the old wooden post by the creek, The sense of unease grew stronger. John stopped again, squinting at the distance. At first, he thought it was a stray piece of cloth caught on the post, swaying gently in the morning breeze. But as he moved closer, he realized it was something far more unusual. There, hanging awkwardly from the post, was a young woman. She looked weak, and her clothes were torn. John's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was no time for panic. He had faced difficult situations before, but never anything like this. Without wasting a moment, John ran the last few steps and carefully helped her down from the post. She was barely conscious, shivering in the cold morning air. He noticed the faint marks on her arms and the exhaustion in her eyes. His mind raced, thinking of what to do next. The nearest town was miles away, and even if he called for help, it would take time for anyone to arrive. He had to act quickly. Using his jacket to keep her warm, he supported her as he slowly walked back to the cabin, careful not to make sudden movements that could worsen her condition. Once inside, John laid her gently on the bed, covering her with blankets. He poured her a small cup of water and spoke softly, reassuring her that she was safe now. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and gradually she began to regain some consciousness. John stayed by her side, watching carefully, offering comfort where he could. The ranch that had always been a place of quiet and solitude had suddenly become a place of urgency, concern, and unexpected responsibility. For John, this moment marked a turning point. He realized that life could change in an instant, that the calm and predictable existence he had known could be interrupted in ways he had never imagined. And as he watched her rest, he felt a mixture of worry and curiosity. Who was she? How had she ended up here, all alone, in the middle of nowhere? These questions buzzed in his mind, but he knew that right now the most important thing was to help her recover. Everything else would come later. By the time the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting bright light across the cabin, John had already started planning how he would care for her. He cleaned her minor injuries as best as he could, offered her something to eat, and made sure the fire kept the room warm. Even in his years of solitude, he had never felt a stronger sense of purpose. The ranch had given him a life of quiet, but now it had given him someone to care for, someone who needed him. And though he didn't know it yet, this unexpected encounter would change everything about his life. The days of quiet routine of living alone on the endless plains were over. Something new, something fragile and uncertain had entered his world. And John McAllister, the rancher who had grown so used to solitude, was about to discover that life could be full of surprises, even in the most unexpected places. John McAllister had never faced anything like this before. The girl he had found near the old post was still weak and pale, lying on the bed in his small cabin. He had given her water and wrapped her in warm blankets, but it was clear that she needed more than that. Her breathing was shallow, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the thin sheet around her. John had grown used to caring for animals and fixing fences, but this was different. This was a human being in need, someone who had likely faced fear, exhaustion, and danger before reaching his ranch. He walked over to the kitchen and prepared a simple meal, using the supplies he always kept on hand. Some bread, a little butter, and a few eggs were all he had, but it was enough for now. He carefully brought the food to her bedside, speaking softly as he set it down. "You need to eat something. It will help you get your strength back," he said gently. The girl's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, and for the first time she looked directly at him. Her gaze was cautious, as if she didn't yet know whether she could trust him. "I thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John smiled slightly, nodding. "You're safe here. That's all that matters for now," he said. She hesitated, then took a small bite of the bread he had offered. John watched her carefully, feeling a mix of concern and curiosity. He didn't want to rush her, but he also knew that her condition could worsen if she didn't rest and regain some strength. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fireplace. John settled into a chair nearby, keeping an eye on her. He noticed the faint bruises on her arms and the dirt smudged on her face, signs that she had been through something difficult. But there was something else too, a sense of resilience in her eyes. Even though she was weak and scared, she had survived long enough to reach his ranch. That thought gave John hope that she would recover. Over the next few hours, he cleaned the cabin thoroughly, making sure she had a comfortable place to lie down. He brought extra blankets, adjusted the fire so it would keep her warm, and even prepared a small jug of fresh water. Every movement he made was careful, as if he was trying not to disturb her rest. At one point, he noticed her eyelids drooping, and he realized she had fallen asleep. Watching her sleep, John felt a strange sense of protectiveness. He had never had anyone rely on him like this before. The day passed slowly. John went outside to check on the animals, but his mind was never far from the cabin. He fed the cattle, filled the water troughs, and inspected the fences, but each time he heard a sound from the cabin, maybe a soft groan or a shift of blankets, he rushed back to make sure she was all right. By late afternoon, the girl woke again. This time, she was a little stronger and managed to sit up with John's help. "My name is Emily," she said, her voice still weak but clearer than before. John nodded, smiling. "Nice to meet you, Emily. I'm John." "You're safe here now," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring whether he was telling the truth. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered again, and this time there was a hint of relief in her eyes. John realized that Emily had been through a lot, and he wanted to give her space to feel comfortable. He brought her some water and a little more food, then sat quietly nearby. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," he said. Emily nodded, closing her eyes briefly. John understood. Some stories were hard to tell, and trust had to be earned slowly. For now, all that mattered was that she was safe, warm, and cared for. As the sun began to set, John lit more candles and made sure the cabin was bright enough for Emily to see. He wanted her to feel secure, not frightened. The soft glow of the fire mixed with the candlelight, creating a warm atmosphere that was far from the harshness of the world outside. John felt a sense of pride and responsibility. This ranch, which had been his home and sanctuary for so long, had now become a refuge for someone else. Emily's recovery was gradual. Over the next few days, she gained a little more strength. She could sit up for longer periods, drink water without assistance, and even manage a few bites of food on her own. John continued to help her, but he also encouraged her independence, giving her small tasks that were safe and easy. She helped water the plants in the cabin garden, fed the chickens, and even swept the floor. These small tasks made her feel useful, and they slowly built a sense of trust between them. During quiet moments, John and Emily began to talk. At first, the conversations were simple, about the weather, the animals, and the daily routines on the ranch. Emily listened carefully, asking questions about life on the plains. She was curious, cautious, and polite, but there was a spark of interest in her eyes. John enjoyed these moments more than he expected. He found himself smiling at her questions, and sometimes laughing at her observations. For the first time in years, he realized that he was enjoying someone's company. John also shared some stories of his own life, keeping the tales light and simple. He told Emily about his childhood on the ranch, how he had learned to ride horses, care for cattle, and fix anything that broke. He mentioned the long winters and the beauty of the plains in summer. Emily listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that made John pause and think. Her curiosity and gentle nature reminded him of the world beyond the ranch, a world he had mostly left behind. Evenings became a special time for both of them. After dinner, they would sit by the fireplace, talking softly, or sometimes just enjoying the quiet together. Emily would trace the patterns in the wooden floor, while John would repair small tools or write in his journal. The silence was no longer lonely. It was shared, comfortable, and reassuring. John felt a warmth he hadn't known in years, a feeling that came from being needed and appreciated. Emily, in turn, began to feel safer and calmer, knowing that she had found someone she could trust. As the week went on, John noticed small changes in Emily. She smiled more often, her posture improved, and she even started laughing at his occasional jokes. The fear and exhaustion that had been so evident when he first found her were slowly fading. She began to explore the cabin and the surrounding land, sometimes wandering into the garden or watching the cattle from a safe distance. John stayed nearby, letting her move freely but ready to help if needed. He admired her courage and determination, and he felt proud of how far she had come in such a short time. Despite the improvement, Emily was still cautious about sharing her past. John never pressed her, understanding that some things could only be revealed when she felt ready. Instead, he focused on building trust and creating a sense of normalcy. He taught her simple ranch tasks like feeding the animals and mending fences. Emily was a quick learner, and she seemed to enjoy contributing. Each small accomplishment boosted her confidence and strengthened the bond between them. By the end of the week, John realized that his life had begun to change in subtle but important ways. The ranch, which had once been a place of solitude and routine, was now filled with activity, conversation, and companionship. He looked at Emily and felt a sense of hope and possibility that he hadn't experienced in years. Life on the plains was still hard, still full of work and challenges, but now there was someone to share it with. Someone who needed him. And someone who had started to care for him in return. That first week also taught John patience and empathy. He learned to anticipate Emily's needs without her asking, to offer comfort without overwhelming her, and to give space when necessary. These lessons were new and sometimes difficult, but they were worth every moment. He realized that caring for another person required more than physical effort. It required understanding, patience, and emotional presence. The experience was transforming him, shaping him into someone more compassionate, aware, and connected. As the sun rose on another morning, John watched Emily step outside for the first time without assistance. She took in the vast fields, the rolling hills, and the soft light of dawn, her eyes wide with wonder. John felt a deep sense of satisfaction and relief. She was safe, recovering, and beginning to embrace life again. And though they had only known each other for a few days, he felt a connection that went beyond simple friendship. Something significant had started between them. An unspoken trust, a fragile bond that promised hope for the future. For John, this experience was a reminder that life could change unexpectedly. The quiet, predictable routine of the ranch had been interrupted by Emily's arrival, and though it had initially been frightening, it had brought a new sense of purpose and joy. He realized that the plains were no longer just his domain. They were a shared space, a place of healing and connection. And for Emily, the ranch had become more than a refuge. It was a place where she could start to rebuild, find strength, and slowly let go of fear. As they stood together on the porch watching the morning light illuminate the vast landscape, John and Emily both felt a sense of quiet anticipation. The world was wide, full of challenges and surprises, but together they could face it. And neither of them could have known that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Days turned into a week, and Emily's strength grew steadily under John's care. The cabin that had once been quiet and empty now had a rhythm to it, a sense of life that John had not realized he had been missing. Emily learned to move around more confidently, to manage small chores, and even to help John with light work on the ranch. The first morning she helped him feed the chickens, she laughed when one of them pecked at her hand. John smiled from the doorway, happy to see her smile genuinely for the first time. It was a small thing, but in that moment he felt a sense of connection he hadn't experienced in years. Emily was cautious, but her curiosity grew each day. She asked about the ranch, the animals, and the wide plains that stretched endlessly around them. John enjoyed explaining everything, from how to mend fences to the simple joys of watching the sunrise over the fields. She would sit on the porch, her eyes wide as he spoke, occasionally asking questions or commenting on the things she noticed. "It's so quiet here," she said one morning, looking around at the hills and the open sky. "But in a good way. It feels safe." John nodded, feeling a warm sense of pride. He had spent years alone in this place, but now he realized that its quiet beauty could be shared. Evenings became a special time for them. After the chores were done and the animals were settled, they would sit together by the fireplace. Sometimes they spoke of light topics, the colors of the sky, the changing seasons, or the small successes of the day. Other times they simply sat in silence, letting the warmth of the fire and the comfort of shared space fill the room. Emily began to show signs of trust, sharing small details of her life and asking questions about John's past. It was a slow process, but John understood that trust could not be rushed. John noticed that Emily had a quiet strength. Though she had arrived at the ranch tired and frightened, she had endured something difficult to reach him. Each day she seemed a little more confident, a little more willing to engage with the world around her. She helped with the cattle, learned to gather eggs from the chickens, and even ventured further into the pastures, always careful, always observant. John watched her with admiration. She had been through so much, yet she approached each task with care and determination. One afternoon, while fixing a fence near the far edge of the property, John watched Emily from a distance. She was helping him hold a wooden post steady, her small hands gripping it firmly. "You're doing better than I thought," he said with a smile. Emily looked up at him, a small blush rising on her cheeks. "I just don't want to make mistakes," she replied. John chuckled softly. "Mistakes are part of learning." "You'll get the hang of it." Emily nodded, her eyes sparkling with quiet determination. Moments like these made John realize that life on the ranch was no longer just about survival. It was about learning, sharing, and connecting. Even as Emily regained her strength, there were moments of hesitation. Sometimes she would pause, staring at the distant hills, lost in thought. Other times she would flinch at sudden sounds as if something from her past still haunted her. John never pressed her to talk. Instead, he offered quiet support, letting her know she was safe. "Whenever you're ready to tell me anything, I'll listen," he said gently one evening. Emily's lips curved into a small, grateful smile, but she remained silent. John understood that trust was a fragile thing, and he was determined to nurture it patiently. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. They began to share small meals together, laugh at little jokes, and talk about the dreams they once had. Emily confessed that she had always loved nature, that she had dreamed of living somewhere quiet and peaceful, even though her life had taken unexpected turns. John shared stories of his own youth, of the lessons he had learned while growing up on the ranch, and of the quiet satisfaction of working the land. These stories created a bridge between their worlds, connecting their pasts in ways neither had anticipated. One evening, after a long day of tending the animals and repairing fences, John and Emily sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried the faint scent of grass and soil. Emily leaned back against the railing, sighing softly. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said quietly. John glanced at her, noticing the peace in her eyes. "Sometimes the world surprises us when we least expect it," he replied. She nodded, a small smile on her face. It was a moment of quiet understanding, a moment that made the challenges of the past seem distant. Over the next few days, Emily began to share more about herself. She told John about the struggles she had faced in the town she had left behind, though she spoke carefully, avoiding painful details. John listened without judgment, offering reassurance and understanding. He realized that her presence on the ranch was not just about recovery, it was about trust, healing, and learning to believe in kindness again. Each story she shared, no matter how small, brought them closer together. John also observed the way Emily interacted with the animals. She had a natural ease with them, gently speaking to the cattle and carefully handling the chickens. He was impressed by her patience and attentiveness. "You have a way with them," he said one afternoon as she guided a calf back to the pen. Emily smiled shyly. "I've always loved animals," she admitted. John nodded, realizing that her love for nature and life on the land made her a perfect fit for the ranch. As the days passed, Emily grew more confident in her movements, her actions, and her presence on the ranch. She learned to navigate the property, understanding which areas were safe and which required caution. John watched her with quiet pride. The girl who had arrived weak and frightened was becoming strong, capable, and independent. Yet despite her growing independence, their bond deepened. They shared laughter, small accomplishments, and quiet moments that brought comfort and joy. One afternoon, after finishing their chores, John suggested they take a walk across the fields. Emily agreed, and together they strolled through the tall grass, feeling the sun on their faces and the wind in their hair. They talked about simple things, the changing seasons, the animals, and the beauty of the plains. Emily seemed lighter, freer, and more relaxed than she had been when she first arrived. John felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that she was beginning to heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Evenings were filled with shared routines that slowly became traditions. They would cook together, share stories by the fire, and sometimes simply sit in silence, enjoying the comfort of each other's company. John found that he looked forward to these moments more than any other part of the day. Emily, too, seemed to thrive in the quiet companionship, finding solace and strength in the predictability of their shared life. By the end of part 3, the cabin had transformed from a place of solitude into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and trust. John realized that Emily's presence had changed his life in ways he had never imagined. The once lonely rancher had found a companion, someone to share the beauty of the plains with, someone to care for and protect, and Emily, who had arrived frightened and uncertain, had begun to rediscover hope, confidence, and the simple joys of life. Together they had begun the delicate process of healing, not just from physical exhaustion, but from the invisible wounds that life had left on them both. The journey was far from over, and there were still questions that remained unanswered, challenges that awaited them, and moments that would test their growing trust. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. In the quiet plains, amidst the wide skies and rolling fields, two lives had begun to intertwine, creating a new story filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine before. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch had taken on a rhythm that both John and Emily began to enjoy. The mornings were busy with chores, the afternoons were filled with lessons about the land, and the evenings were spent by the fire, sharing stories or simply enjoying the quiet together. Emily had grown stronger, more confident, and more comfortable with her surroundings. She could now handle small tasks on her own, like feeding the chickens, carrying water, and helping John with the fence repairs. It was clear that she was not only healing physically but also slowly regaining a sense of independence. Despite her growing strength, there were moments when Emily became quiet and distant. She would sit on the porch, staring at the horizon, her expression thoughtful and somewhat sad. John noticed these moments but did not interrupt. He had learned from their first days together that trust and comfort could not be forced. Sometimes, all a person needed was a little time and the reassurance that they were safe. "Whenever you feel ready to talk, I'll be here," John said gently one evening as they watched the sun sink behind the hills. Emily gave a small nod, grateful but silent. One afternoon, after a morning of mending fences, Emily approached John hesitantly. "Can we sit for a while?" she asked softly. John nodded and gestured to a small bench near the garden. They sat together, the warm sunlight bathing them in golden light. For a few moments, neither spoke. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant lowing of cattle. John waited patiently, sensing that Emily wanted to say something important. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. I didn't come here by accident," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "I left the town because things were difficult. I couldn't stay there anymore. It wasn't safe, and I didn't have anyone I could trust." She paused, staring at the ground. John nodded, encouraging her to continue without pressuring her. "You're safe now," he said softly. "No one can harm you here." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and vulnerability. "I know. That's why I'm here." She spoke slowly, carefully choosing her words. Emily told John about feeling trapped in her previous life, how circumstances had made it impossible for her to stay. She avoided giving too many painful details, but she shared enough to show that she had been through challenges and fear. John listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. He could see the courage it took for her to speak at all. Each word she shared was a step toward trust, a step toward healing, and John felt honored that she was opening her heart to him. As Emily spoke, John realized how resilient she truly was. Despite everything she had endured, she had survived and made her way to the safety of the ranch. Her determination and courage inspired him.
"You've been very brave, Emily," he said gently when she finished. "It takes a lot of strength to come this far, and you've done it." Emily's lips curved into a small smile, a sign that she was beginning to believe in her own resilience. John felt a sense of pride and relief, knowing that she was starting to let go of some of the fear she had carried with her. Over the following days, their conversations grew deeper. Emily shared more about her dreams, her hopes, and the small things she had once enjoyed before life became difficult. John shared more about his own past, the challenges of living alone on the ranch, the lessons he had learned, and the quiet joys he had discovered in the wide plains. Through these exchanges, they found a shared understanding. Both had experienced loneliness, both had faced hardships, and both had learned to find strength in unexpected ways. Emily also began to express herself through small actions. She started tending the garden more diligently, arranging the vegetables and flowers with care. She would often hum softly while working, a sound that brought a sense of calm and normalcy to the cabin. John admired the way she found joy in simple tasks, how she appreciated small accomplishments, and how she embraced the beauty of everyday life. These moments reminded him that even in the face of challenges, there was always room for hope and happiness. One morning, as they were checking the fences together, Emily asked a question that had clearly been on her mind for some time.
"John, do you ever get lonely here?" she asked, glancing at him with curiosity.
John smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned to enjoy the quiet, to find peace in the land and the routine. And now, it's different. I'm not alone anymore." Emily looked at him, her expression softening.
"I'm glad," she said quietly. "I think I feel safe here, more than I've felt anywhere else in a long time." That simple exchange carried a depth of meaning neither needed to elaborate on. As the weeks continued, Emily's presence began to transform the ranch in subtle ways.
John noticed how she brightened the cabin with her energy, how her laughter echoed across the fields, and how her curiosity brought new life to his daily routines. He found himself looking forward to her questions, her observations, and even her occasional gentle teasing.
Emily had become not just a companion but a source of light in the quiet, predictable world of the ranch. At night, they would often sit by the fire, sharing stories or quietly observing the flames. Emily sometimes spoke of her favorite books, her love for nature, and her small dreams for the future. John listened, fascinated by her perspective and her insights.
He realized that life could be richer when shared, that the quiet beauty of the ranch could be amplified by companionship. The bond between them deepened, built on trust, respect, and a growing sense of mutual care. John also noticed how Emily interacted with the animals in new ways. She had always been gentle, but now she took initiative, leading the chickens to food, checking on the calves, and even helping with minor tasks in the stables. John watched with admiration. Her confidence had grown, and she had begun to find her place on the ranch. In her actions, he saw not only recovery, but transformation. Emily was no longer just someone he was helping. She was becoming an active part of the life they were building together. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Emily asked John if they could walk to a small hill near the edge of the property. From there, the view of the entire ranch was breathtaking. They stood together, looking out over the fields, the hills, and the distant tree line. Emily took a deep breath, the wind blowing through her hair. "It's beautiful here," she said softly.
"I never thought I'd see a place like this." John nodded, feeling the same awe he had experienced many times over the years, but now shared with someone else. "It is," he agreed.
"And it's even better when it's shared." During these walks, Emily began to reveal small pieces of her past, the things she had once enjoyed, and the dreams she had once held. She spoke cautiously, careful not to dwell on pain, but John could sense the depth of her experiences. He encouraged her gently, helping her find the courage to speak while also respecting her boundaries. With each story, each small revelation, their bond grew stronger. They were building something rare, a relationship based on trust, understanding, and the shared experience of life in its simplest and most profound forms. By the end of Part 4, the ranch had fully transformed in their minds. It was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It was a sanctuary, a space of healing, hope, and connection. John realized that he had grown emotionally in ways he had never anticipated. He had learned patience, empathy, and the deep satisfaction that came from helping someone not just survive but thrive. Emily had learned to trust again, to find joy in simple pleasures, and to believe that safety and kindness could exist in the world. Together, they were beginning to create a new chapter in their lives. The past, while never forgotten, no longer held them hostage. The ranch had become a place where wounds could heal, where strength could grow, and where two people who had once faced loneliness and fear could find companionship, understanding, and hope. And although they did not yet know what the future held, they felt certain that, whatever came next, they would face it together. By the time the 5th week arrived, life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt natural for both John and Emily. The early mornings were no longer a quiet, solitary routine. Instead, they were filled with the gentle bustle of shared tasks. John would wake first, as always, preparing coffee and checking the animals, but now Emily would be by his side, ready to help with feeding, watering, and small chores around the barn. Their work was quiet and steady, the kind that allowed both of them to talk softly or enjoy the simple beauty of the land without needing words all the time. Emily had regained nearly all her strength, moving around the ranch with ease. She could tend to the animals, help mend fences, and even ride a horse under John's careful guidance. The hesitation and fear that had been present when she first arrived were gone, replaced with confidence and a sense of belonging. She laughed more freely, her smile lighting up the cabin and the fields beyond. John often found himself glancing at her and feeling a warmth he had not known in years. The ranch, which had once been a place of quiet solitude, now felt alive in a new and meaningful way. Their conversations had deepened as well. Emily shared stories of her childhood, her small dreams, and the moments that had brought her joy long before her life became complicated. John shared his own experiences growing up on the ranch, teaching her about the land, the animals, and the lessons that came from years of living close to nature.
How wonderful those women and medical tragedies ended up.
They spoke not only of work and routines, but also of hopes for the future, the changing seasons, and the beauty of the vast plains around them. Through these talks, they grew closer, building a bond that was stronger than either had anticipated. One evening, after finishing the day's work, John and Emily sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold as the sun set behind the hills. The air was calm, carrying the faint scent of wild flowers and grass. Emily leaned back, letting out a contented sigh. "I never imagined a place like this existed," she said softly. John looked at her and smiled. "It's always been here," he said. "You just needed to see it." Emily's gaze softened, and for a moment neither spoke. It was a quiet moment of peace, a feeling that everything, despite the past difficulties, was finally in the right place. As the days passed, they began to work together more naturally, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. Emily learned which tools John preferred for certain tasks, how he liked the fences checked, and even the small ways he organized the barn. John noticed how attentive she had become, how she moved with care and purpose, and how her confidence now matched his own. The ranch, once his solitary domain, had become a shared space, alive with cooperation, trust, and mutual respect. One bright morning, Emily suggested they plant new flowers along the path to the cabin. John agreed, happy to have her help with the small project. As they dug holes and placed the seedlings into the soil, Emily laughed at a small mishap with the watering can. John chuckled, wiping his hands on his pants. "It's okay," he said. "The important thing is that we try and we enjoy the work." Emily nodded, smiling. "It's more than just work," she said. "It feels like we're making this place ours." John looked around at the ranch, at the animals grazing peacefully, the flowers they were planting, and the cabin bathed in sunlight, and he felt the same. This was their shared life now, a place where they could both thrive. Evenings became a time of reflection and storytelling. By the fire, they would recount the events of the day, the small successes, and sometimes the challenges they had overcome together. Emily told John about her favorite places in nature, books she had read, and memories from her childhood that made her smile. John listened, fascinated by her stories, and occasionally shared anecdotes from his youth on the ranch. These evenings became cherished rituals, moments where both felt safe, understood, and connected. As Emily continued to heal both physically and emotionally, she began to venture further into the land surrounding the cabin. She explored the pastures, observed the animals with a careful eye, and sometimes wandered to the edge of the hills to watch the sun rise. John followed at a distance, always ensuring her safety but allowing her independence. He admired her courage and curiosity, realizing that the girl who had arrived so fragile and uncertain was now confident and full of life. She had grown stronger not just in body but in spirit, and John felt proud to have been part of her journey. One afternoon, while working together on a new fence, Emily paused and looked at John thoughtfully. "I've been thinking," she said.
I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next. John stopped, curious. And what have you decided? He asked.
Emily smiled softly.
I want to stay here.
"I feel safe, and I feel happy."
I've never felt like this before.
John felt a rush of relief and joy. He had hoped she would feel at home on the ranch, but hearing her say it aloud made it real.
I'm glad, he said quietly. You're always welcome here. This is your home now, as much as it is mine. Their days continued with small joys and shared accomplishments.
They repaired old barns, painted fences, and tended to the animals with care. Emily even began to help John with tasks he had previously done alone, like checking the water supply and caring for newborn calves.
Each achievement, no matter how small, strengthened their bond. They had learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to find joy in their shared work.
As the seasons changed, the ranch transformed alongside them. Spring brought fresh growth, flowers bloomed, and the fields were filled with vibrant green. Emily and John planted new vegetables in the garden, harvested herbs, and marveled at the beauty of the land. The ranch had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of hope, healing, and shared life.
Together, they had turned what had once been a solitary existence into a vibrant, fulfilling life filled with companionship and purpose. Even in quiet moments, the bond between them deepened.
Emily would often sit by the window, reading or writing in her journal, while John repaired tools or worked on small projects. Sometimes they would simply sit together, watching the sunset and listening to the distant sounds of nature.
These moments, though simple, were filled with warmth and understanding. They had both learned the value of patience, empathy, and shared experience.
By now, Emily's laughter was a familiar and comforting sound on the ranch. She had rediscovered a sense of freedom and safety, learning to trust again and to embrace the joy of simple living.
John had rediscovered connection and companionship, realizing that life was richer when shared with someone who cared.
The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a haven of healing, growth, and hope for both of them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned to shades of orange and pink, John and Emily sat on the porch together, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Emily reached for John's hand, a small gesture that spoke volumes. "Thank you," she said softly.
For everything! For helping me! For trusting me! And for making me feel safe. John squeezed her hand gently.
No. Emily.
Thank you for trusting me, for staying, and for letting me share this life with you.
In that moment, words were unnecessary. The bond they had built spoke louder than any sentence could. As night fell, the cabin glowed with the soft light of the fire. The stars sparkled above the wide plains, and the world felt calm, peaceful, and full of possibility. John and Emily, sitting together, understood that life could be challenging and unpredictable, but it could also be full of hope, joy, and connection. They had faced uncertainty and fear, yet through patience, trust, and care, they had found a shared path forward. By the end of this chapter in their lives, John and Emily had created something rare and beautiful. They had transformed the ranch from a place of solitude into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and companionship. They had learned to rely on each other, to nurture trust, and to embrace the simple joys of everyday life. And although the future remained uncertain, they knew that,
together, they could face whatever came next. The wide plains, the golden hills, and the quiet skies that had once been John's world alone were now shared with Emily. Together, they had built a life filled with hope, healing, and possibility. And in the heart of the ranch, they had discovered something even more valuable than comfort or routine. They had discovered each other, and the profound strength and joy that came from human connection. As the fire crackled and the night air grew cooler, John and Emily sat side by side watching the stars. They did not need words to express the depth of their bond. It was felt in the quiet moments, the shared labor, and the gentle gestures of care and kindness that had defined their days. Life on the ranch would continue, filled with work, challenges, and beauty, but now it would always be shared. And for John and Emily, that was more than enough. It was everything.